And we're live.
Okay, welcome to the May 13th, 2021 meeting of the Haverford Township Planning Commission. I ask everyone to, Marge, why don't you take roll call, please?
Sure. Mr. Capuzzi,
Present.
Mr. Reardon,
Here.
Mr. Fiordamondo, Ms. Dobbs, Mr. Shannon,
Here.
Mr. Garrett,
Here.
Ms. Phillips.
Here.
Okay, I'd ask everyone to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
Pledge allegiance
to the flag
to the flag
of the United
United
States
States
of America,
of America,
to the republic
to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
one nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and
justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to thank Brian Barrett for agreeing to join us tonight. Brian is Director of the Township's Park and Recreations Department. And Brian's here to give us a little bit of background and history and some additional information regarding the proposed project at Polo Field, which includes the construction of a new walking trail. Brian, welcome and take it away.
Thank you, Angelo. Angelo provided me with a few questions that the board had asked at your previous meeting. So I'm just going to go through those. And if there's other questions that you have after I go through those, I'd be happy to answer them. The first thing was the history of the project. In 2019, the township had, Andy Lewis had asked about the possibility, Andy Lewis, the Fifth Ward Commissioner, had asked about the possibility of a path at Polo. I think that, and again, I wasn't the director at that time. So Tim Denny, my predecessor, was the one who did most of the conversations between the commissioner and the Civic Association. But my understanding is that Andy was approached by some neighbors about the possibility of a path around Polo. They looked into the possibility. They actually bid the project in 2019. So Pannoni put together bid documents and they bid a bituminous path, a macadam path around the perimeter. When the numbers came back, Andy, I think in conjunction with some residents and maybe even what was then a reforming Brentford Civic Association, decided to put the project on hold to get more feedback from the residents. At that point, Andy was canvassing for election, so he was doing a lot of door-to-door, and he wanted to poll the residents to see, find out, if it's something that they wanted to see. He also wanted to consider a pervious path, something that would allow water to go through it. And in 2019, prior to putting out the bid documents, we had looked into a couple different options related to pervious paths. For any of you that have any knowledge of this, pervious paths are significantly more expensive. The process is a little different and significantly more expensive, probably on the magnitude about 1.5 to 2 times more expensive. So all those factors went into not doing the project in 2019. At the end of 2019, after the election, Andy Lewis, Commissioner Lewis, had approached me and said that there was a consensus among the neighbors that they would like to see a path. So he wanted us to look into a grant through the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And I said there was a program that they do every year through DCNR that could make some funding available for the project. Once we had COVID, it limited our ability to coordinate with Lower Merion and try to put this project together, this grant application. And for those of you, and I think you're probably aware from the conversation last week, the Polo Field is jointly controlled by Lower Merion and Haverford Township. So in order for us to put a grant application in, both communities have to agree to it. So we told Andy at that time that we wouldn't be able to make the grant application for 2020. We would look into 2020, 2021. So starting in the fall, we met with Dr. Gail Ferrari, who is the Brentford Civic Association chairperson. and a couple neighbors from the polo field who had been, who immediate neighbors who were interested in what's going on there. So we met with that group. The Brentford Civic Association did a survey to the immediate neighbors around the polo field to see, again, to poll the residents and make sure we're getting as much feedback as possible. That survey came back, and I think like 70 or 75% were interested in a path. So from that, we spoke with Lower Merion and to see if they would be interested in partnering with Haverford Township. And what that partnering would look like, the grant is a 80-20 grant. So you have to match 20%. So Lower Merion and Haverford Township had agreed to do the match. In order to put a grant together, we have to have a resolution of the Board of Commissioners. And that resolution came out in April for the board to say that they would allocate the funding if the grant came through, that there would be a match there. Lower Merion did the same thing. So we got, as part of the grant application, we submitted our information from Haverford Township, and we submitted Lower Merion's agreeing to that. We also got a letter of support from the Civic Council, the Brentford Civic Association, and then we tried to find some institutions around that area who might be interested in seeing that happen. So we contacted Bryn Mawr Hospital because they're in close proximity to say if they would be interested in helping out. We actually asked for funding, but they didn't have any money. They said they might help us with some signage. We also approached a couple, there's a couple old folks homes, rehab facilities on Railroad Avenue, which borders it. We approached them. They were very happy with the idea. They felt that their residents, once they get past COVID, could actually utilize the trail. And there's an access off of Railroad Avenue onto the polo property and the trail. So that's basically the history of where we are. We, as part of the process, we had to get some engineered drawings. Obviously, we had some engineering drawings from when the project was bid in 2019. We updated those estimates because it's 2 years later. And also we had to update it for the pervious path. So our numbers came in the low 300s for the path, and the contributions, actually it's a 50-50 grant. I apologize. It's a 50-50 grant. So it would be the townships would have to come up with a total of 160,000, and the grant application was for 160,000. So that's basically where we are right now. We have submitted the grant in April, and we'll find out about whether the grant's successful in the fall. And if it is, we would be looking to do some construction in 2022. Okay.
Okay. And
the other question you had, why the township believes the project is needed and how we paid for it. Well, we talked about how it would be paid for. The reason we believe the project would be needed was there was a combination of community asking for it, approaching their commissioner and asking for it, the Civic Association supporting it, the Civic Association going out and doing a survey to get, to make sure that the residents were interested, or at least a consensus among the residents, and the Lower Merion Board and the Parks and Recreation Department also supported the project. And and as far as the why a path is good at a park like Polo is, first off, walking is the most favored form of recreation. And for anybody that's been dealing, with the last 18 months of the limited recreation during COVID, walking is one of the few things you can do. Polo gets a lot of play of youth sports groups. So it would allow, people that are coming to watch to walk around the path while they're watching, that kind of thing. So we thought it was consistent with the way Polo is used. And we thought that there's a lot of value to paths in parks. They seem to be well used for joggers, strollers, kids riding their bikes. They're off the main thoroughfares. They're not worrying about traffic. So we thought that it fit with the purpose of the park and how the park is used. The last question that Angelo gave me was why we believe the project is compliant with the intent of the township's 1988 comprehensive plan. I'm not sure if how familiar you are with the plan, but the plan is in need of updating. And the plan talks about the types of parks that a densely populated suburb should have, whether they're neighborhood parks, sub-neighborhood parks, or community parks. Doesn't really deal with what types of facilities should be at parks. So in my time with the recreation department, our goal when we do capital improvements in parks is not to add anything that's inconsistent with how the park's used and something that's supported by the local community. So that's what we based the project on. And there isn't much in the 1988 comprehensive plan that would go against what I've just told you. So.
Okay, thank you, Brian. What I'd like to do now is go around the table here and ask each of the commissioners if they have any specific questions or comments they'd like to make.
Angelo, if I could, before we start questions, Brian, thank you for coming tonight.
No problem.
Responding. If you could just clarify, when we were presented last week, there were changes from the map, and I think others were a little confused about what is the current
Okay.
path. We have red area, red lines, blue line, and green.
Okay, that's a good question. When the project, and I think I might be able to pull up the map. If you give me 1 second, I think I might be able to pull that up. 1 second. It'd be easier, I think, to see how it works if I pull it up. Might take me a second, but bear with me. Okay, that's not it. But as I'm looking for this, I'll start to explain. When we put together the original project back in 2018, we had 3 items on there. One was a path that took us halfway around the polo field. The second one was, I think I can pull it up now. Yeah, okay, good. I can pull it up. I have to share my screen, so bear with me 1 second. It's always so easy when you're looking at it when you're not under the gun. I'm just trying to share my screen. Bear with me. Oh, there it is. Okay. Can you all see that diagram?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So in 2019, when this was initially bid, there was three possibilities. One was doing just the red area. The second one was taking the blue area and completing a circumference or we'll say a rectangle around the field. And then the third area was the green area. And we did that for cost reasons because at the time the money was going to be allocated from the capital program. And we wanted to have options because we weren't sure what the pricing would come back in. So actually there was a fourth option. If you see at the top on the red area, there's a little box that says, I think it says impervious surface. It says alternate permeable path. So you see like from the infield, right to the left of the infield, all the way down to the end of the parking lot. That area was bid as an add alternate on the initial program, which was what if we made just that part permeable? And the thinking was because the polo field is a large grassy area, that the only one of the areas that could be subject to flooding or rainwater would be coming right off the parking lot. So if we made the pervious path there, there wouldn't be pooling along the parking lot, along the path. So that was what the thinking was. When we put the project.
I'm sorry. Could you explain that again? There's alternate lines. Those thin red lines were the alternate?
Yeah, that was an alternate on the 2019 bid specs. Okay.
But we're only talking about the actual big red line being permeable. We're not talking about that. That's just a way of describing it, correct?
No, actually, it's more that area that's defined and says permeable, just that area bordering the parking lot was bid as an ad alternate, making that permeable. The rest of the
Right.
red and the blue and the green would have all been a macadam or bituminous path.
Okay.
Okay. So when we went through the process to do this grant application, we looked at the diagram, and we realized that we couldn't fit the whole thing because of cost into the grant that we were looking for. Okay. So, and partly that was the limitations on what our township and Lower Merion had to bring to the table. So the budget we were working for was somewhere just a shade over 300,000. When we did just the blue and red sections with that little hip at the bottom left-hand corner going out the railroad, the numbers came in roughly a little between 300 and 320,000. Okay. Now, when I say the numbers came in, that is Pannoni, the township engineer, preparing a cost estimate for our grant application, which is a requirement of the grant application, because they're not going to take your grant seriously unless you have a good idea of what it's going to cost. That's one factor. The other factor was that when the Brentford Civic Association was polling the neighbors, they didn't talk about the green area. And they felt like that because they didn't bring that into the conversation, they didn't feel like it'd be appropriate to add that to it. Having said that, if we added it to it, the grant would have come up short on funding. So it was a combination of the community, the Civic Association, who was going around polling the neighbors, only talked about the blue and red section. And then when we bid the whole, when we had a cost estimate for the whole thing, the numbers came in higher. So we thought if we took that green section out, that we could fit into the grant specifications. I know that's a long-winded way. I hope I explained it, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
So what is the current? Does the current
Current plan
the blue
is-
and the red?
Blue and the red, yes. And without that section along the parking lot, the whole blue and red, according to our grant application and what we're proposing, would be a pervious path, which means it would be allow water to go through it.
And the little squiggle at D and G, is that,
Yeah,
that's
that is,
red?
yeah, that is included in there, and that gives us access to Railroad Avenue.
Thank you.
Now, when we went back and forth with the Civic Association and with Commissioner Lewis, we said the possibility that at a later date, we could consider doing something on the green areas to give access off of Penn and off of Dayton Road. But again, the reason that was pulled was two, it didn't fit into our funding scheme, and that when they were polling the neighbors, for whatever reason, they didn't include that green section. So they felt like they being, I think, Dr. Gail Ferrari and a couple members of the Brentford Civic Association who had polled the neighbors felt like they should stick with what they told the neighbors. So that was another factor, but we would have had to pull that out if we wanted to come in under the grant limits.
So basically you have a loop around the field with a connection to Railroad Avenue.
Yes. And if you see that little jog at the top on the red, it also would connect to the parking lot. There's a little jog.
Right.
So that way we make it accessible. We would make it accessible in that area right at the end of the parking lot. So if somebody had a accessibility issue, we would make a ramp that was accessible.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. Are you okay now? Are we good, David?
Yeah, now I understand.
Okay.
I had understood it differently last time, but thank you for clarifying.
Okay. All right. So let's start with Julia. Julia, you have any questions?
I believe that I read last time in the grant application that the township was prepared to do the required maintenance and cleaning of the path so that it maintains its pervious quality.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there would be and we've worked with Lower Merion because Lower Merion has a few pervious paths, so they have a little more experience in this. But We would be working, you know, they would show us how we would do it. There's a piece of equipment that we purchased that we put in, that we included in our maintenance budget, that if we were able to get the grant, we would purchase that. And our park maintenance team would be the ones doing the maintenance on that.
That's like a vacuum, right?
Yes, basically. It's like a small Zamboni. It's brushes, it's water going down and then sucking it up.
Okay,
All right, that was all from me.
thank you, Julia. Chuck Reardon,
No, I'm good with it.
okay? Jack
No questions here.
and David?
Well, I guess I'm the one with lots of questions. How much is the Zamboni-like machine going to cost the town?
I think it's between $2,000 and $3,000.
It's not too much. Do you have any other sense of the maintenance costs annually?
Well, pretty much if you have that piece of equipment, it would just be the manpower to run it. You'd have to run it 3 or 4 times a year.
Mhm. I have some questions about the proposal, which is really all we have in front of us. One question is, you refer in the proposal to letters of support.
Mm-hmm. I'm not hearing.
Or to Angelo?
I'm sorry, David, you went in and out on me.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with my Zoom connection. And sometimes everything goes out. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
You refer to letters that are attached.
Yes,
Springford Civic Association, the council,
yes,
the institutions,
yes.
Bryn Mawr Hospital and Bryn Mawr Terrace.
Yeah, we also got letters from Greg Vitale's office, state representative, and the state senator's office.
We've not seen those letters. Were they provided? Did anyone ask you for them since our last meeting?
No, but I'd
Did they
be
give it to
happy.
Kelly or?
Yeah, I can forward them to Kelly. Yeah, that's no problem.
Oh, that would be great. That would be helpful.
We also had Delaware County also submitted a letter of support too. I forgot about that.
Well, I'd like to speak to my own experience and also to some comments I've gotten from or heard from people in the community. First of all, you say the property is owned, it's maybe a technicality, but maybe more so. It's owned by Haverford and Lower Merion.
It's actually controlled by Haverford and Lower Merion. Yeah.
Yeah, under a lease.
Yes.
Have you had a chance to look at the lease to see if
Yes. Yeah.
what we're doing
Yes, I
here
have.
complies with the lease?
Yeah, there's nothing in the lease that would, basically what the lease says as far as use is concerned is nothing that's incompatible with the activities of it was the Polo Playfield Association that was
Yes.
actually turned it over to the township. So there's nothing in that lease that this would be incompatible with.
But the lease calls that it be maintained for recreation
Yes,
and not interfere with recreation.
yes.
You talk about the neighborhood being densely packed. I would say, yeah, there's some row houses and there's some duplex. It's a varied neighborhood with duplexes, but also medium separate houses. And in Millbrook and Buck, you have what I would call mansions, very large houses,
Yeah.
and not at all dense.
I think we lost him again.
David, we can't hear you. David, can you hear us? This is ridiculous. I'm gonna try to call him, see if I can get a hold of him.
You need help with something?
The guy's talking and I can't hear him.
Okay.
I don't have his number. Does anybody have David's number?
Where's David?
He's not here.
See this here? You can unmute. This guy is muted.
Yeah, but that's Jack. The guy who's talking isn't even on. Does anybody see him? Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
Yeah, I
you,
can
but I
hear
don't
you.
see him.
Does anybody hear David?
This doesn't go down.
No,
I don't.
Okay.
I don't
right.
even
I
see him
can't
on
see him
here.
either or hear him.
Okay. I don't know what to do. I know Dave had a bunch of questions.
Okay.
And I don't have his phone number, so I can't call him. So,
Well, I would say this, Angelo, if we don't get David back for this, any questions you submit, I will answer, and I will forward my answers to your whole thing.
I appreciate that, Brian. The question or the issue is, I think we're being asked to respond in a very narrow range here, as far as whether or not the idea of building a path, a walking path at a ball field is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Sure.
And the answer is yes.
Well, let me just finish. We're asked to look at a plan that was done in 1988. And when you look at the plan, there's nothing in there about walking trails. And now I'm thinking 33 years ago, number one, is it reasonable to expect a comprehensive plan to be able to predict out 33 years what the township may or may not need as far as recreational facilities? I mean, given the fact that demographics change, people's interests change, I don't think it's realistic to think that could happen. When I look back at myself, 33 years ago, I had 4 kids under the age of 11, and walking trails were for old people. Well, guess what? Guess what I am? I'm an old person. And I walk 2 miles every day, and it's nice to have a variety of locations to walk, especially if it's in a good setting, nice setting. It's better than walking the streets in Brookline. So I think, and again, if you look at some of the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan, the first general objective is to coordinate planning activities with all surrounding municipalities. And it seems like we've done that. Lower Merion is a partner in this project. It's not only Haverford Township that's looking to do this, but it's also Lower Merion Township. I doubt that if there wasn't a need or sincere interest in something like this, that both townships wouldn't have come together and prepared this application. So that's what I have, or that's what I think about this whole thing. And
Angelo, I couldn't hear anything you said. I got cut off and I'm in the middle of a
unfortunately,
sentence. I don't know, what was the last thing you heard me say?
It was something about the proposal. I'm not sure. It was pretty much as you started speaking after the last time I spoke.
Everything I've been saying has not been heard?
No, we haven't heard you for about 4 or 5 minutes.
the last we heard, David, was that Brian was going to get you copies of letters of support.
And then we spoke about the ownership.
Then we
Yes.
started talking about the ownership, and there is nothing in the lease that would suggest that a walking trail would not be permitted on this property.
My system keeps freezing. So bear with me, I'll do the best I can. Sometimes I can't hear you, and I gather you were precluded from hearing me.
We couldn't see you either.
Really? No, I got can you see me now?
See you
Yes,
now,
we
yep.
can.
All right, I'll keep going. Let's see. First of all, I mentioned I didn't feel the neighborhood was densely packed. You make the case for the neighborhood being densely packed.
And let me back up, David. When we talk, the comprehensive plan talks about being Haverford Township being a densely populated suburb.
Mhm.
So I was referring more to the entire township, not specifically to that. But also in the capital plan, it talks about the mixed use in the Brentford neighborhood. So I am aware and what you said, and I agree with it. So
So my
Yeah.
comments about the housing were heard.
yes, yeah, definitely, and they were on point.
You mentioned that I asked if you have walked the path.
Have I walked?
Have you walked the existing area? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yes, yes.
I'm trying to figure out what I said and what hasn't been heard. Did you hear anything I said about Bryn Mawr Terrace, its proximity
No.
to Preston?
No.
Preston has a path. When you talk about need, what seemed odd is that you omitted completely Preston Field. Why did you choose to omit any mention of Preston, which has a very nice concrete or
Right,
cement
it's a
path?
it's a macadam path. So you mean in the grant proposal?
Well, you talked about the need for the path at,
Right.
let me finish. You talked
Okay.
about the need for the path. Within a block or block and a half, there's another path in a field, a smaller field, true, but
Yes.
a nice path. That path is much closer, I would say, to Bryn Mawr Terrace. If it can be used by Bryn Mawr Terrace. I spoke already and I mentioned that my dad was in Bryn Mawr Terrace and I spent a fair amount of time there toward the end of his life. And I live on Rugby, which is borders Bryn Mawr Terrace. And the residents there will come out and usually in wheelchairs accompanied not by staff, but by their family members. And usually, as with my dad, they just go out to the terrace or the sort of patio area and get a little sun and fresh air and then go back. Some in wheelchairs will come out to as far as Rugby Road or maybe Preston, but mostly Rugby. And they go up Rugby and down and say hi to the neighbors and then return. I would find it very surprising that anybody in a wheelchair in Bryn Mawr Terrace would make use of a field that's farther away. I would be surprised if they use it at all, and I'd be surprised if they would go to the Preston field. But so I question the necessity or the need for this expense.
You want me to answer that question or not?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so as I said in the beginning, this was a neighbor-driven request through the commissioner. So when the request came up, my predecessor, Tim Denny, evaluated the request. He realized what you might have missed Angelo saying when we lost you there for a little bit, that walking paths are very popular. And those neighbors that are asking for the path at Polo know there's a path at Preston. So again, it was something that was the commissioner heard from the neighbors that they would like to consider a path. The commissioner said we should poll the neighbors, and he did that. The Civic Association polled the neighbors. So a lot of times when we do improvements at a park, that's driven, the requests are driven by the community. So, and then we followed up again when we came back to this project after, well, not after COVID, but as COVID was wrapping up. And the Brentford Civic Association said, we want to pull them again and make sure there's that interest. And we want to talk to them about a pervious path. So going back to need, do we need a path at Polo? I wouldn't say that there's a need for a path at Polo. What I would say is the neighbors have asked the township to consider it. The commissioner asked the township to consider it. We did consider it, and then we put a grant application in to see if we could get the funding to do this. And we do know from the Preston project that walking paths are very popular, very popular. So that's what I would say about the need question that you were bringing up.
Yeah, well, that's fair. I want to talk about the neighbors and the neighborhood a little bit. But as I say, I don't see a need specifically for Bryn Mawr Terrace folks and Bryn Mawr Hospital folks. But I'll come back to the neighbors. Speaking for myself, I think I was cut off when I talked about my personal history, so people didn't have to be bored by that. So maybe I can shorten it. I've been living there for over 30 years. Since I've been living there pre-COVID, I regularly took the train, what came to be known as the R5. And when I did that, I generally crossed the field, cut across the polo field, and going in the morning and coming back in the evening. Granted, when it was wet, I either didn't do it if it was raining, or I had to clean off my shoes when I crossed the field. Since COVID, I've been walking both Preston and Polo regularly. I find it great. I find that it's a very nice place to walk without putting in a pervious path. If you walk down the blue line along the softball field and then out toward, well, the long blue line, that the walkers there have created a path. It's fairly hard, it's fairly packed down, the grass is worn away. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yes, I can hear you.
Because it cuts out on my screen. So there's a path there, and I walk there, and it's great, and it is being utilized by the neighbors. When I'm out there, it's like being in a play. I mean, you run into friends and neighbors, and you make new friends. So the things you describe as being a benefit of the path are already happening, at least, well, I would say the whole path. On the other side, you have path and the parking lot. So I just question the need to change that field. My concern is changing also. So I'm very fond of the polo field, and I'm very fond of walking there. And the neighbors I know are fond of it as well. Again, I just don't see why that needs to be changed. Let me get into some more specifics. And concerns I have about the existing field. And what is going to happen at G to D, that's a very steep, that's one of the trickier spots to get into the field. It's sort of been broken through by people going to play baseball.
Off of Railroad, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, the railroad.
Yeah. There would have to be some engineering there to make that work, and it's not going to be insignificant, but it can be done. The engineers obviously, the engineers walked this before they did it too, and they feel we can make that work.
Do you know if that would be a ramp or steps?
No, it would definitely be a ramp because it wouldn't be accessible with steps.
Second, on the short red side, which runs from, on your drawing, D to C.
Yes.
As I read that, that's on the high ground.
Yes, we were staying on the high ground. We weren't going down the hill.
That's good, because when you go down the hill, I don't know if the right word is swale, but that's a very wet area. So
yes,
walking, my biggest problem is getting from Railroad up to the path. And that area down there is very wet. I would say if there's something that could be done with this money, draining that, figuring out how to drain that area or keep it drier would be a great improvement. Secondly, and I'll try to keep it short, I'm also concerned about the blue line, the long blue line, and the entire blue line, because number one of the things the neighbors like about the field, even those who want the path, is the trees. And the path as it now exists looks like it's cutting through the trees. So the question is, are those trees going to be cut down?
Yeah, my understanding is there be little or no vegetation taken down.
Okay, it's just hard to see how you can run right through the trees without.
Well, I
rid of
think,
some of them.
yeah, and you got to remember, this is a render or a diagram to explain a basic thing. The path can move back and forth in that space. There's probably about a 20-foot space that the path could move back and forth. And again, we walked it and we feel like it can fit.
I lost you.
Yeah, I
Hello?
said, we walked it. Can you hear me now, David?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
We walked it and we feel like it can fit. We walked it with Commissioner Lewis, we walked it with members of Civic Association, and we walked it with the engineers. So we do feel like that can fit.
Okay, the other issues then with making it fit are, and this is more of a cutting into recreation and safety concern. That blue line runs along the softball field. When there, as I say, I walk there. When there are games going on or practices, that area to the, it's the, I don't know what direction that is, probably the
First base
East.
side, third base
yes, on the first base line, and also, well, on both first and third, but mainly on the first base side, people play pepper and they warm up, and that's where people are playing. And it's, as you go out on that blue line down the first base line, you're in foul territory and at risk of being hit with foul balls. So you should pay attention. That's the way it is now, and I don't know if having a path gives people a false sense of security there. But I'm mostly concerned with cutting into, if it's moved away from the trees, you have a very tight space between the bench on the first base side and the path and the trees. That's a very tight area. Similarly, it's got a little more room on the hardball field in the opposite corner where near letter A, but you're still running pretty close to an area where balls are thrown and in practice and pitchers warm up. Less on the recreation issue also, there is I don't know if it's officially used as a marked field. I mean, there's certain areas where Lower Merion or various soccer clubs lay out a field and play.
Yes.
The area near B, the red line B, seems is an area where it's sort of BC running to the kind of closer to the fence, to the boundary, is an area where they set up for soccer games. I think what I've seen is mostly younger kids.
Yeah, usually it's instructional soccer, and that's Haverford soccer. Yeah, so that small area, that lower area is set up for soccer practices, those types of things. Yes.
And I think this path would eliminate that. Because
No, I don't think
in my
it would.
view, it cuts right into that playing area.
Yeah, I don't see it because it's on the, as you know, that red line, what's G, I guess D is on the ridge. And the area that I think you're referring to is below the ridge, down closer up to the, towards Railroad Avenue.
No, yes, but you're right about the lower area.
So are you talking
But
like?
also where C goes to B, that's another area where they set up and have games or practices.
And basically there may be some use that has to be tweaked because of this, just like when they put in the softball field, some use had to be tweaked, and when they put in the baseball field, some use had to be tweaked. And in putting in this path there, would people use the park a little differently in some areas? Absolutely. And that was considered, but we think that we can make it work.
Mhm. Well, I raised doubts. I'm very concerned about that, and I hope you are able, if it goes through and you get the grant and decide to do it, I hope you can maintain the recreation, because that would be encroaching on the actual use and intention of this.
Yeah, we would not
Park
do
and
anything
lease.
to prevent us from playing on the fields,
The,
because we would not eliminate a field to put a path in, because fields are in great need. Like if you ask me, do I need another field of polo? I might say yes. Now neighbors might feel differently, but if you're asking what the community would like to see, fields are always a big deal. So we wouldn't do anything that would prevent us from playing on those soccer fields or those diamonds.
Okay. In terms of community support, when I first heard about this, I spoke to a few people. I think there were people on Dayton who thought it was a good idea, but I think the people on Dayton were interested in a path kind of around the playground area at that end, or certainly having access to the raised area. Now that has been eliminated. I don't know if folks have gone back to Dayton to ask their feelings on that. That's just one sort of minor issue. The bigger issue is question the grounds. I don't see that there was any groundswell of support for the path. There was interest in the path. You described it accurately, I thought. You said there was interest in a path. And that's what there is. There's interest in a path. The interest was generated by some people. It didn't come from the community as a whole. And then you're correct, there was surveys taken, or a survey. The only one I know of one survey. It was done with and I think as you point out, it was the more immediate folks, not the entire Brentford community. And the majority, not everyone. I mean, what was it, 70-30 or in that range?
Yeah, it was in the 70% range.
Yeah. Which is a nice majority. But have you looked at the survey?
I read the survey before it went out. I haven't seen the responses.
The survey was very general. Would you be interested? It gave people a number of things that might be done. People were interested in making it more of a nature path, more of a green area with more trees and shrubs. But there was the majority thought it was a good idea to have a path. I talked to people who use the path and walk it. They don't seem to feel a need for a path. The more to the point, that survey did not say, would you like to see a pervious path made of reconstituted rubber tires, tires surrounding the field, circumnavigating the field. People I've spoken to have said, my survey is not a survey, it's entirely anecdotal. I haven't attempted to make any kind of general survey, but several people have said to me, whatever they do there, I don't want tires. And that's an environmental risk. And they're worried about that and water leaching into the groundwater and eventually the creeks. Another thing is people said, well, I thought they were talking about a path, like a nature path, like Haverford College. I'm not interested in a hard or firm path that's going to be an attraction for people on skateboards and rollerblades. So, and makes it less natural and less sort of bucolic. I mean, one of the things I love about the polo field is it's when kids are playing there, it's great because it's a lively area. And when they go home and it's calm in the evening, and in the early morning, it's a beautiful, what's the word? It's just a retreat, a cooler. It's like 5 degrees, 10 degrees cooler in the summer than the surrounding area. As you said, it's being used now for runners. That wouldn't change. If anything, they wouldn't be able to use it for cross country. I don't know that, but my main point is the community was not in favor. I don't think there was a vote, and there certainly was no meeting of the neighbors to discuss what would be best. Individuals may have favored a path, but I've heard no one say what I really want there is a hard or firm pervious path. What else? That's
Okay.
there was also a question about money, and there is no money.
David,
I'm almost done answering.
David.
My last point. Yes, sir.
I think we've talked about this enough. Okay, we're getting off the topic of what we're being asked to do here, which is basically to answer a simple question as to whether or not we think the walking trail, idea of a walking trail at Polo Fields is consistent with the comprehensive plan. We're not being asked to evaluate the questionnaire that was sent out. We're not being asked to design the path. We're being asked a very simple question. Okay, so I want us to focus on that and only that.
Okay.
And if you or anybody that you've spoken to has a real objection to this, I think the place to voice your objection is with the Board of Commissioners. They're the
I
ones
understand.
who are presenting this plan for construction. And if you feel that everybody's voice hasn't been heard, then I think you need to make that clear to them so that they can make a more informed decision, if you will.
I agree. I think it is a concern for the commissioners and perhaps not for the planning commission. But I do think these are concerns that I've raised that relate to the recreational use of that facility and the need for it. Last 2 points. One, there's just an error in the proposal. And again, this may be for the commissioners. There is no money from the Brentford Civic Association. They have none. They've never contributed any. And there's no polo field association as such. But
That money came from Andy Lewis,
exactly.
and he gave that money through the Brentford Civic Association to assist in the project. And I can't speak from the grave.
No, I understand. Andy was a strong supporter of this and did put his own money into it. It's just, and I think we mentioned that at the last meeting, or someone did. But I think it's part, lastly, finally, in terms of comprehensive plan, you mentioned that there's a new one being developed. It would seem to me that we don't know what the new one's going to say. I agree that the old one doesn't specify what kind of paths should be in the field. It does talk about the recreation, and I am concerned about encroachments on recreation and changing the recreation and, as I said, bucolic nature of this field. But I'm suggesting that perhaps it would be best to hold off on this until we see what the new comprehensive plan has to say. I understand that would depend on the timing and if we get the grant right away. Do you have any sense, Mr. Barrett, of the timing of this and how long it will take?
Yeah, I would expect
For
that if we
decision?
get the grant will be awarded in the fall, and that the project, because right now, the commissioners are considering additional revenues for capital fund projects for the recreation throughout the township. We are coming to the end of the 2018 bond that was done for capital improvements. We spent roughly $2.5 million. We were asked to put together a list of projects. The polo path was on there. We put together another list of projects, roughly $2 million. The commissioners are evaluating that along with the other capital requirements in the township related to the Brookline School, the library. So new funding would have to be approved for us to have the $80,000 match.
And do we have any sense from the state of when the grant would be approved?
No, I don't. What I do know is that grants that are multi-municipality are looked at much more favorably because they think that you're garnering more local support. I think our according to our DCNR rep, the Community Natural Resources rep, that we have a fairly strong grant application, but she doesn't know what all the other applications are. So, so I think our chances are fairly good to get the grant.
Well, I agree with Angelo. If these are concerns to members of the community, the proper place to address them is the commissioners. So.
Okay, thank you, David.
Sorry to be long. I just think it's an important change and an important
understand.
expenditure. And I just want to conclude, I have to conclude, I'm not dead set against it. I've raised a lot of objections, or let's call them more concerns. I am concerned about encroaching on the existing recreational use. So I feel on the present record, I don't think I can vote for saying it's consistent with the plan. I don't see anything in the comprehensive plan as it exists now that would bar this, but I think part of consistency is evaluating need and how this may affect the existing recreational use. So on the present record, I don't think I can vote for it.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is put a question before the board. I'll ask each of you to vote individually. Brian, you can take the plan down if you don't mind.
Sure, no problem.
So the question before the board would be whether or not, in your opinion, the proposed walking trail at the polo field is consistent with the township's comprehensive plan. If you feel that it is consistent, you vote yes. If you feel that it's not consistent, you vote no. And if you're not sure, or you have doubts, or you need more information, you can abstain. Okay, everybody clear with that?
Yes.
Okay, Marge, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Capuzzi,
Yes.
Mr. Reardon,
Yes.
Ms. Dobbs,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
Abstain.
Mr. Garrett,
Yes.
Ms. Phillips.
Yes.
Okay, well then, Marge, you can report to the Board of Commissioners that it's the majority opinion of the Township Planning Commission that the construction of a walking path around the polo field is consistent with the township's comprehensive plan. Brian, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate
No
all
problem.
the information, and thank you for answering all our questions.
And if anybody has any further questions, you can contact me at the township. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for hearing me out and.
No problem.
and
No problem. Thank
responding.
you for your
It
comment.
was helpful.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome. Thank you. Take care.
Okay, next on the agenda is a review of the minutes from the April 22nd Planning Commission meeting. I'm assuming everyone had a chance to look at those and review those. Does anybody have any comments or corrections they'd like to make to those minutes? I don't see anybody talking, so I'm going to assume that the minutes are okay. I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes as written,
I second that.
April 22nd meeting. Who seconded it?
I did.
Chuck Reardon second. Margie, call roll, please.
Told you I'd mess up eventually. Mr. Capuzzi,
Yes.
Mr. Reardon,
Yes.
Ms. Dobbs,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
Yes.
Mr. Garrett,
Yes.
Ms. Phillips.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everyone. There's nothing else on our agenda. Anybody care to comment or have anything they'd like to say before we adjourn?
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Wait. No, I have something before that. I have a quick
Okay.
question, and hopefully this is maybe from Marge. Is there any news on the historical property along the Darby Creek Trail that was getting a pathway behind it?
I have no information to that.
That's all. Thank you.
Jack, Kelly will be back in the office, I guess, on Monday. Maybe you can send her a quick email, just ask her that question, okay? She
I will do
probably
that.
have an answer for you anyhow.
Angela, I have a question also. How are we doing on the comprehensive plan?
We're waiting to start up again, I guess. I think it all hinges on when the township decides to have in-person meetings.
Mhm.
We got to a point where we sent out a questionnaire and we had responses. And we were ready to have a public meeting, basically a workshop, if you will, where people come in and ask questions and give ideas and opinions. So that was back in March of 2020. And that's when things shut down. So I think it's all going to hinge, David, on when the township decides to start having public meetings again. And it looks like we're getting close, considering what was said today about people who are vaccinated.
Yeah.
So maybe by the fall, we'll be able to start up full force again. And we probably have a good 8 months to a year left to do on that plan before we have a final plan. So there's a lot of input still that has to be gathered and evaluated and things like that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, anybody else? It's your last chance. Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a good, I'm going to be away for a few weeks, but hopefully I'll catch up with you next time.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank
take
you.
Have
care.
a good break.
Bye.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Bye.